What is going on, everybody? Brandon here, back again with another solo pod. Um, ever since I was a little kid, you know, three of my favorite things were, music, sports, and then most of all, out of all of those, professional wrestling. Um, yes, professional wrestling does fall under the sports category. Um, but in my eyes, it's always been kind of so much more than that, and it's always been something very near and dear to me. And before everyone gets on me and says, "Oh, Brandon, don't you know that wrestling isn't real?" Uh, to you, I say, "Fuck off." Yes, it is. Kidding, a little bit, not really, but yeah. Um, I know it's not quote unquote real. But I mean, there's just absolutely no denying that, the men, the women, the non-binary folk that, put their bodies on the line and put their could easily just get one injury that shortens their career entirely. Every time they get in the ring, they put that on the line. They put their livelihood, their way of making money, um, their way of getting recognition. They put all of that on the line. So to me, anyone and everyone who has done any form of wrestling, whether it be working at the highest level in one of the biggest companies in the world, like WWE or New Japan or now AEW, and Impact is more on the rise with, Kenny Omega and all of them kind of bridging that gap. Or if you've done anything for, a local indie, um, like PWG down in Reseda, or like you could consider like Progress, MLW, Rev Pro, those types of shows. Um, you could easily consider those indies as well. Or if you've just done like backyard wrestling, like I grew up doing backyard wrestling with my friends. Obviously, none of us had a ring, but the next best thing for us was the trampoline at my across the street neighbor's house growing up. So it's like anyone who's done anything like that and taken the time, put the work in, you are an athlete to me. You'll never not be. Um, whether you're like 5'2", 117 pounds, like AEW's Marco Stunt, or you're 7'4", 500 pounds, like Andre the Giant, or anywhere in between, um, yeah, you are a wrestler. You're an athlete. Like Zach Gowen, for instance, wrestled with one leg. Um, so it's like there's no reason that anyone who has put their life into this sport shouldn't be considered real just because they're not actually punching each other, they're not kicking each other like they are in the UFC. They're still taking bumps, they're still making contact with each other when they're doing suplexes, power bombs, all that kind of stuff. So none of it's easy. So while it may not be real to everybody because it's scripted, these people are still incredible athletes, incredible performers. So, there's nothing better. Um, and there are people that like their wrestling to be more like Shakespearean than others, more acting, more performance. And then there's the people that are just completely in love with the Texas death like Texas deathmatch style of wrestling. Like shout out to CZW. You know what you did. And some people like myself just like to see wrestlers go out there and just put on a performance. Um, High flying spots, feats of just incredible strength and athleticism, in ring psychology, in ring comedy. And overall, just like there are plenty of people that every time they go out there, they just completely blow my mind. Um, and so today I want to just, talk about wrestling for a little bit. It's helped me a lot throughout the pandemic and having to stay inside and having to socially distance and everything. It's given me a lot more time to catch up on stuff that I didn't even know was out there. A lot of shows and a lot of promotions that I wasn't aware of. A lot of guys that I wasn't aware of. A lot of gals, non-binaries that I wasn't aware of that are just absolutely killing it in like, whenever they have the opportunity, whether they're signed to a big company or they're out there just killing it on the indies. So today I wanted to just kind of go over a list of, about 25 people um, that I find myself just coming back to their matches, their in-ring promos, just any of their like backstage promos, any of their spots, any of that kind of stuff. I really just find myself coming back to these people. And I realize that realistically, there's no way that I could really rank this list as much as I try. There are so many things about any of these performers that could easily make them number one. Maybe one day I'll really sit down and hash it out with myself and really put the list together. But, for now, I just really want to give you a list of people that I'm kind of very much into at this moment. Another note before we get into it, I was born in the year 2000, and I've noticed that it very much shows in my list, being a much younger wrestling fan than a lot of people. I realize that, I have a newer take on a lot of these guys and gals. So, but I mean, obviously, there's still a few of the classics that are in there because there are some dudes that are just completely timeless and you just have to talk about. I missed out on like the entirety of like the golden era, the new generation era, and most of the attitude era. Technically, the attitude era ended in 2002, but I was a 2-year-old baby, so it's not like I was cognizant or like I wasn't really paying attention to any of this. I started watching wrestling in about 2005, so about halfway through the Ruthless Aggression era, and it kind of reflects. But I still am watching today. I still love it. It's still one of my huge passions, whether it be still actually doing any of this stuff, doing any of the backyard wrestling, or just watching and connecting with the performers, So obviously this list is going to be in no particular order. Not this time. Maybe another time I'll have to really put it in a good order, but for right now it's just going to be a list of the guys that I'm really into at this point. Before we kick into the official list, I've got to put some honorable mentions. Chris Hero. I learned about him more as Cassius Ohno when he was in NXT and NXT UK. But after watching his matches and watching him as a performer and on the mic and everything, it made me want to go back and really look throughout his career. So that really got me into, I think Chris Hero is really what got me into like PWG. Watching him. There's a match he has against Oh, I want to say it's Mark Andrews, where as soon as the bell rings, he just hits him with like a tornado kick right to the dome and goes for the pin. Mark Andrews kicks out, and obviously Chris Hero can't believe it, but he was the one that really got me into kind of the PWG style um, of wrestling, and that's as of kind of right this minute, that's where most of my interest lies. Um, so yeah, Chris Hero, um, and then kicking it over to like more of a comedy wrestler, obviously Colt Cabana. He's just the best dude. Has a great podcast. Um, has been on what is it? Doug Loves Movies. Doug Benson's podcast, and he's just the best. He's doing great stuff in AEW right now with the Dark Order. Um, Next up, and the honorable mentions list is Pac, formerly known as Neville, Adrian Neville, when he was in WWE, NXT, Cruiserweight Champion, that kind of stuff. And now he's in, obviously, Death Triangle in AEW with the Lucha Brothers, and just recently challenged for the AEW World Championship against two guys who were potentially on this list. Spoiler alert. Next up on there is Kyle O'Reilly. He was always, during the kind of the height of the Undisputed Era in NXT, especially in the War Games matches and in the tag team championship matches when it was him and Bobby Fish, kind of that Red Dragon inner circle of the Undisputed Era. He was always just great to watch, and then kind of seeing him also in PWG also made me want to go back and check out his Ring of Honor and his New Japan stuff, because I had never seen any of that up until pretty recently. And so Kyle O'Reilly has definitely become one of my favorite wrestlers. Next up on there, Sasha Banks. Just the boss has been the boss, since back in the NXT days, and now obviously on the main roster. The Banks Bailey series, saga, whatever you want to call it, that's been going from very early days of NXT up until pretty recently last year, kind of culminating with their match at Hell in a Cell. She's great, man. She's absolutely just the best. She is the boss for a reason. Can't wait to really see her kind of back in action on the main roster. She has been taking a little bit of time off and recently, but kind of waiting for her to come back. Next up, Pete Dunne, the Bruiserweight. First kind of saw Pete Dunne in the War Games match when it was Pete Dunne, Ricochet, and the War Raiders versus UE. That was really the first that I had seen of Pete Dunne. And then seeing him now, after kind of COVID lockdowns, restrictions from kind of getting over from the UK, the travel restrictions, but seeing him back has been just a joy to watch. Pete Dunne is just an absolute menace in the ring. He's fucking incredible, man. Next up, got, the cutest wrestler in the world, Maki Ito, kawaii and whatnot. Really, I only learned about Maki Ito very, very recently from her, what's the word, like her matches and her performances and stuff with AEW. with their women's championship tournament. And, after seeing her there and then teaming with Britt Baker um, for that one match, really kind of got me into that. As much as I claim to love wrestling, and I do, don't get me wrong, but I have the misfortune of not really watching a lot of like the Joshi promotions, Stardom, and promotions of that nature. I haven't really found the time to get into those, and that's something that I would like to do in the future. But um, Maki Ito is definitely a good kind of gateway into that. Um, Next up, Walter Ringkampf. He's just the best way to describe him at this point is like a special attraction wrestler, kind of like Andre was back in like the 80s. Um, there's no reason he should be able to do some of the things that he does. He's deceptively fast, like deceptively agile, but you don't see a lot of that because a lot of his matches are just him being an absolute brute. You know, um, the match he had against Ilya Dragunov in NXT UK for the UK title back in either October or November of last year was like Dave Meltzer graded it 5 stars, but he said that he almost didn't give it a score, didn't give it a grade because he had never seen something that just absolutely violent. Um, it seemed like those two were really just kind of beating the piss out of each other. And that really is something that's very fun to watch. And it's like, obviously, not every match is going to be like that. There's no way that it could, or guys' careers would be a lot shorter. But every once in a while, when you get a match like that, it's an absolute spectacle to see, and it's just very fun to watch. Um, and then last up on the you saw that. Last up on the list of honorable mentions is Chris Statlander. Um, the way that she's been kind of booked in AEW, teaming with the Best Friends. Like I wasn't same. It's weird, So like AEW has introduced me to just a ton of talent that I would probably have never seen. Because up until probably the last 2 years, 3 years, like I was only watching WWE because, in all honesty, that was all I really knew existed because it was really the only show that was on cable. Because like I wasn't around for the WCW days. I wasn't around for like original ECW, and so I definitely missed out on like the Monday Night Wars for sure. Um, and then Impact wasn't a huge deal. Kind of when I was growing up, because it was still TNA for a little while. And it kind of really wasn't my thing, even when there were, WWE guys that were in it, like, Hardy, Kurt Angle, Sting, Christian, Scott Steiner, like Booker T, guys like that, even though that they had the talent and like they had the performers and everything, it just kind of really never really caught my eye. But recently with AEW, kind of taken almost the main stage in terms of kind of mainstream wrestling in the U.S. It's introduced me to a ton of just incredible talent that I would have never seen otherwise. Um, and at the very tip top of that list is Chris Statlander. Um, the alien is, like the name describes, an alien. Um, watching Chris Statlander come back during the Arcade Anarchy match between Best Friends and Miro and Kip Sabian, seeing her just knock that like glass pane into Penelope Ford's face was like, that popped me. And even before that, I hadn't seen too much of her, even at the start of her AEW career, because tearing the ACL or her MCL, whatever it was, in her knee, kind of prevented me from seeing her on that more kind of grandiose stage. But as soon as she came back, I was all about it. And so, like I did with Chris Hero, like seeing him in WWE, like seeing Chris Statlander come back, I instantly enjoyed the character. I instantly enjoyed the moveset. And so I was like, hey, I got to go back and I got to watch every Chris Statlander match imaginable, because she is just an absolute stud. She's one of my favorite performers in AEW, for sure at the moment. But, that kind of wraps up the honorable mentions portion. So, without further ado, let's hop into the actual list. And like I said earlier, there's no way that I was able to rank these, because every single one of them could easily be number one for me, without a doubt. But, kicking it off, love that Danhausen, baby. The Donovan Danhausen, the man, currently, I want to say, signed to a Ring of Honor contract, and if not, working in very close proximity with Ring of Honor. I think my first introduction to Danhausen was very, very recently. It was I want to say it was a Chris Van Vliet interview, and I saw Danhausen, but it wasn't obviously in the full makeup. It was very toned back. But hearing him talk about the Danhausen character and everything about that, I was, I was hooked like nothing. Incredible, just based on, in-ring character, promo character, but then if you kind of follow him on any of his like social medias outside of, the ring, he's he's just as good. His YouTube channel, the Good Night Housing with Danhausen podcast, or late night show, interview section. Yeah, it's been, he's definitely at the top of the list right now, like right this very second, but that's just because the past few weeks I've been on like quite a Danhausen kick, for sure, following a lot of the stuff he does. Gatanic Panic, his tag team with Effie on the Indies, just fucking great, man. They have so much chemistry, him and Warhorse. Danhausen also got me into Ethan Page, because like I said, I wasn't really keen on a lot of Impact. Like, I knew there were guys from WWE and Impact, and I knew Impact was kind of working with AEW and stuff, but it wasn't I don't know, hadn't really caught my eye, but then, seeing him, Danhausen in his interactions with Ethan Page, and then Ethan Page showing up in AEW obviously made me go back and do that. So kind of get more into Impact. Um, and so because of the initial kind of rabbit hole that I went into for like Danhausen and his content and stuff, it very much put me on to other wrestlers that are now people that I follow and that I watch and that I, root for and everything. And so he, he's kind of put me onto a bunch of other people. And so not only do I love him and his character and all of his interactions with other wrestlers, but, I also love that he's put me on to plenty of other guys. So, yeah, Danhausen is the best. Very nice, very evil. Love that Danhausen. Up next, you know, wrestling's biggest genius. And I have no problem saying that. Orange Cassidy is the man. Like when I was talking about Chris Statlander earlier, her work with the best friends, Chucky, Trent, and OC. The man is great for plenty of reasons, but he's gotten himself so over with plenty of groups of different wrestling fans. Like, really the only people that I know that dislike Orange Cassidy are probably Jim Cornette and like the wrestling purists, where it should be Luthez and what was his name? Was it Frank Gotch? And like the very old school turn of the 20th century, almost carnival spectacle wrestling. Those are the only people I know that just really dislike Orange Cassidy. And you don't have to be a fan of him for his like in-ring talent or his character, but it's just the best thing about him is he's been able to get himself so over without doing much wrestling. The man, I could watch Orange Cassidy get squashed by anybody. Well, not anybody, but by a lot of people, and I would still just love it because of him as a performer. Yeah, dude, freshly squeezed. He's the man. Up next, we got Mr. Athletic, Matanza Cueto himself, Jeff Cobb. I think the first time I ever watched Jeff Cobb was a PWG match against Ricochet. And from there, Jeff Cobb was my guy. Big, stocky dude who should not be able to do moonsaults, who should not be able to be as fast and as quick and as agile and as just incredible in the ring as he is, but still be one of the strongest guys in the ring at all times. There's a PWG match, and it was Jeff Cobb, Walter, and Keith Lee, and just the sheer amount of chops in that match were sickening, I would say, because they were just beating the hell out of each other. But seeing those three dudes in the ring together was wonderland for me, because they're all just the greatest. But Jeff Cobb, his work on the indie scene as Jeff Cobb and then as Matanza Cueto and Lucha Underground, like being the unstoppable monster force that he portrays and that he really is. Just very, what's the word? I would say that if he got a push, because he's currently in New Japan, but if he got any form of push, he could be your top guy. Like, I think you could sell a company on Jeff Cobb. And while that may not be the opinion of a lot of wrestling fans, or any wrestling fans for that matter, you put Jeff Cobb on the card, I'm going to watch it. Like, you put him in a match against anybody, I will watch it, because he's so fun to watch. His match against Bandito, I want to say it was at the Battle of Los Angeles finals, for PWG, was just one of the most enjoyable matches that I think I've ever watched. And I find myself now, as a more, you could say, mature wrestling fan, I find myself going back to more of like the indie shows and the shows that really aren't completely mainstream anymore. Because when you give a bunch of wrestlers, if you just tell them, hey man, you guys got 15 minutes, go out there and put on a show, they're gonna do it. Because they're not wrestling to be recognized by Vince McMahon or by Triple H or by any of those guys. They're wrestling because they love to do it, and they want to just perfect their craft, and they want to move their career forward. So they're gonna put on a show every time. And I think the top of that for me is Jeff Cobb. And so, moving on. I mean, what can you say about Kenny Omega that hasn't already been said? Some would argue he's the best wrestler in the world currently. I don't really know if I have an argument against that. The belt collector storyline that they're running in AEW right now has been, super enjoyable to watch. Kenny's run in New Japan, whether it be, early in his career, in the junior heavyweight division, or like teaming with Kota Ibushi as the Golden Lovers, or being the leader of Bullet Club, but not really being the leader of Bullet Club. He's more leader of the Elite. Kenny's real good dude, real enjoyable to watch. He's from Winnipeg. Go Jets. I'm not from Winnipeg, but it's go Jets. Kenny Omega is kind of one of those guys where you don't really need to say a ton about him to get your point across. And I know that may be a little bit hypocritical because I am rambling quite a bit about it, but it's Kenny Omega, man. What else can you say? Next up, mentioned him earlier, Bandito. I realize that a lot of the guys that I kind of have a fondness for and have really taken a liking to, have all, not all, but a lot of them have kind of put their time through Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. And I noticed that, like, Jeff Cobb did stints in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. Kenny Omega was in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla for a little while. Bandito especially was in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. there, there hasn't been a company or a promotion that has meant or that has kind of really given me so much entertainment over probably the past 3-4 years, 2-3 years, than Pro Wrestling Guerrilla has. Um, and so, watching Bandito, whether it be in matches against, like I said earlier, Jeff Cobb or against Penta or Ray Phoenix or any of the dudes like that, they've all been. I don't think I've seen a bad Bandito match. Of the matches that I have seen of him, I don't think there's been one that I haven't enjoyed watching. And so, he's obviously with Ring of Honor as of right now, as far as I'm aware. And so, still follow him through there. Still continue to watch his matches. Still continue to support him. He's great. He's great for sure. Next up, got the most highly functioning alcoholic outside of no one. I think Adam Page is the most highly functioning alcoholic in the world. I think obviously Hangman was in New Japan as a part of Bullet Club. He was in Ring of Honor. He obviously another one, but he was in PWG as well. But I think he was one of the first guys that I kind of took notice to in AEW. And so, as soon as I saw him, wrestle for the first time, I was hooked. Adam Page, greatest man to ever walk the planet, cowboy shit. I think right now in wrestling, I think the buckshot lariat is the best finisher. You're still going to have, at the end of the day, you're still going to have your spears, and you're going to have your cutters, your RKOs, your stunners, your super kicks, which are almost to the point where they're played out. But, I think Hangman's really the only one that Hangman and, Kazuchika Okada, obviously with the Rainmaker, but I think they're the only two that, I could watch them hit a clothesline on anybody any day of the week, without a doubt. And not only is he great in ring, he is a great storyteller. He is in his backstage promos, even on BTE, on the Bucks YouTube channel for doing the Being the Elite vlogs. His work with the Dark Order, and then the kind of infighting between the Elite and the Kenny story and all of that stuff. There has been no one in AEW that I've enjoyed watching more than Hangman Page. And so I do believe, hot take, I believe that Hangman Page will be the first person in AEW to kick out of the One-Winged Angel. There's only been one person in history that's ever done it, and it was Kota Ibushi in DDT Pro. But we don't talk about that because the One-Winged Angel is the most protected finisher in wrestling. And I think Hangman will be the first one to kick out. But that's just me. Next up, it's your boy. It's the most beautiful man on the planet. It's Keith Lee. Like I said with, Jeff Cobb and Walter and stuff, there's no reason a man that big should be doing the things that he's doing. Being as agile and quick just in the ring while still maintaining the high level of strength, and just kind of raw physical charisma. I think of any wrestler currently going right now, Keith Lee is the most physically charismatic man on the planet. Um, in one day, I will marry Keith Lee. Mia Yim, please step aside. He is mine. Thank you very much. Next, it's Fergal Devitt, y'all. It's Balor. Look at him. That man is, and I'm this is a weird off-topic transition, but he's just the most handsome man ever. Wouldn't y'all agree? Like, look at him. Look at the beard. I think it's the beard. I think that's really what sells it for me. But, Finn, obviously in New Japan, the first leader of the Bullet Club, and, coming over to WWE, being over in NXT, and kind of pushing himself further than I think anybody in the company right now. His original NXT run, and then being sent up to the main roster, being the first Universal Champion. And then obviously having to vacate that because of injury. And then, coming back, and going back down to NXT, where I think he is really kind of thriving at the moment. Locked into that feud with Karrion Kross, over the NXT Championship and everything. And then adding, adding Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Pete Dunne, himself, and then Karrion Kross all into that title picture. Is kind of the best thing going in NXT right now. Probably the most enjoyable part of watching NXT right now is the top title picture. And that's not to take away from the the tag team titles or any of the women's titles, or like even the North American division, but the crop of talent that's at the height of NXT's title picture. I mean, the 5-6 guys in that title picture are some of the best wrestlers on the planet and have been for quite a while. So just kind of watching them all at this time has been a blast. And at the very center of that, for me at least, has been Finn Balor. His match against Kyle O'Reilly at TakeOver, I want to say it was 31, was just an outstanding match. Those two men work so incredibly well together. And even going back to when he was in NXT originally, with The Fiend and with his main roster run, I don't think there's been a bad point in Finn Balor's WWE career at this point, aside from, maybe injuries. But, I mean, if a few injuries is the only thing that's stopping you from being one of the biggest draws in the company, and you move past those with what feels like supernatural ease, I think you've got it made. Probably assuming that after this kind of title feud ends, Um, I have the sneaking suspicion that Balor will be called back up to the main roster. And I'm not quite sure how I feel about that at this point, but I guess we'll just kind of have to see when we get there. But yeah, next up, it's Jericho, man. Um, not a whole lot to be said about Chris Jericho. His band has one good song, and it's Judas. But aside from Chris Jericho's AEW run, being the first AEW World Champion and being kind of the leader of the Inner Circle, and his feud with Orange Cassidy and his feud with MJF and everything that he's been kind of going through in AEW has been good to watch, but there'll never be. I don't think you can top WCW Jericho and then early into his WWE run. That's the best Jericho. And obviously I wasn't around to watch that when it originally happened, but having the network and everything and having them own all the old WCW footage kind of gives me that opportunity to kind of immerse myself in that time period of wrestling. And yeah, obviously late 90s, early 2000s were you could say less politically correct era of wrestling, but I don't think any of that takes away from his in-ring prowess. But I would say that Jericho is probably a top 5 promo of all time. A top 5 just talker, a mic guy of all time. Yeah, man, and like I said, there's not a whole lot to say about Jericho that hasn't already been said throughout his 30 years of professional wrestling. But yeah, Jericho's definitely in my top for a reason. Next up, recently released superstar Aleister Black. Now, Tommy End, obviously going back to his name that he used on the Indies, and what's actually closer to his real name than Aleister Black. But the kind of the match that really made me really start paying attention to and kind of making me feel more fulfilled when it comes to watching wrestling again was Black and Ricochet versus the War Raiders at TakeOver New York. That match opened the show, and I legitimately feel like if they had let it go on for 10, 15 more minutes, I could have watched that no problem and not gotten bored. His technical abilities inside the ring, along with his kickboxing, Muay Thai striking style, couple that with his agility and his speed, and he doesn't look it, but he's also a really good high flyer. Arihara moonsaults and diving double foot stomps, meteoras, that kind of thing. Always made him the kind of most. Him and Ricochet are really the two guys, to me personally. Obviously, no one like other people might not share the same sentiment, but they're kind of the two guys right now that represent the newer style of professional wrestling and the kind of the new era of that, because it's, you know, obviously the high flying and the strong style like striking styles of these guys have been around since way back when, and I'm not, going to deny any of that, but after the kind of the PG era of WWE in the mainstream took off around like early 2010s, and I guess technically like 2008, 2009, and then onward up until, Aleister Black in NXT, there weren't a lot of guys like him. Obviously, you had the Wyatt family and the kind of the darker, more moody, angsty guys, but I immediately connected with Aleister Black, and I immediately loved watching him as a performer. And so that War Raiders match at TakeOver New York is kind of the first thing that I show to people who, don't really watch wrestling, but, know what it is. That's kind of the first thing I show them to give them an idea of the just type of wrestling and the style that kind of encapsulates current, well, obviously that was 2018, but at that point, current NXT and the current landscape of wrestling. But, it is, it sucks that he's not with the company anymore, but, wherever he goes, he's just going to be an absolute force. So yeah, Aleister Black. Next up, Rey Fenix. 1/3 of Death Triangle, 1/2 of the Lucha Brothers. My personal favorite Lucha Underground champion of all time, Rey Fenix. He is on kind of the same level for me as Bandito. When it comes to the in-ring technicality and technical ability of him, but also mixing in the high flying and the strong striking. When I said earlier that the kind of the super kick is almost a played out move at this point, it's still one of the most classic moves, for sure, without a doubt. And, the Bucks, the Young Bucks, have kind of made it theirs, along with, the Usos in WWE on that end of that spectrum. But I think right now the kind of the sleeper pick for the best super kick in wrestling is Rey Fenix. There was a match when he was in Lucha Underground, and obviously Lucha Underground was more of a TV show about wrestling rather than a wrestling TV show, if that kind of makes any sense. But Lucha Underground was more scripted than any other wrestling promotion or wrestling show is, because it was a production. It was a TV show that just happened to star a bunch of wrestlers. But there was a match he had on Lucha Underground, and he hit one of the meanest super kicks I've ever seen. The kind of the extension and the follow through on his leg, mixed with that perfectly timed thigh slap, made it sound like a shotgun blast went off. And that was the kind of the first time I had ever really watched Rey Fenix was in Lucha Underground. And so seeing him do incredible things there, and then go on to obviously AAA and CMLL and what is it, like MLW, places like that. Seeing him succeed there, and now obviously being in AEW, being able to watch him consistently has just been a blast for me. And so, yeah, Ray Phoenix, kind of, on that same level as Bandito for me. Next up, Adam Cole, Bay Bay, former leader of the now disbanded Undisputed Era. We knew it was coming, but I don't know if we were all ready for it to happen. Adam Cole is, in my eyes, the kind of the modern day Shawn Michaels. And I know a lot of people share that sentiment, so it's not like I'm revolutionary by saying that, but it definitely holds true. Based off of, his look, his moveset. Obviously, Shawn Michaels wasn't hitting Canadian destroyers on people that I know of, but Adam Cole is the modern day Shawn Michaels, and I don't think there's you can't really say anything bad about Adam Cole. He's a great promo. He's a great in-ring guy, and then outside of the ring, outside of his persona and his character, he seems like he's a great dude also. And so, there's nothing bad you can say about Adam Cole. The leader of the Yes movement, Daniel Bryan Danielson, whatever you want to call him. The WrestleMania 30 was one of the most, I would say, pleasing moments, like emotionally pleasing moments I've had as like a WWE fan probably ever. And I know, like I said earlier, I'm not revolutionary when it comes to that take. Plenty of people share that same sentiment with me, but it was so easy to love Daniel Bryan. The eternal underdog, except in his Mania 35 match against Kofi. But the eternal underdog, one of the indie scene, indie being Ring of Honor and New Japan, but kind of one of the indie scene's greatest treasures. There's not a lot, like with Adam Cole, there's not a lot that you can say about Daniel Bryan in a negative light. You just want to root for Daniel Bryan and everything that he does. Minus his kind of environmental eco-terrorist heel run, but even then, he was still great. Even as you could call him the heel in that situation, but even as that heel, he's still Daniel Bryan, and he's still just he's gonna be the man no matter what. To a lot of people, hopefully, if he decides not to either extend his contract with WWE or, for that matter, sign anywhere else, whether that be back with Ring of Honor or with New Japan, or, if one day he shows up in AEW out of the blue, or if the Mania 37 match against Edge and Roman was his last match, then I think he went out on a really good note. Obviously, he didn't win, but Roman's the best character in wrestling, um, from the WWE standpoint at least. But there's, yeah, I don't know. It'll be a kind of a sad day when Daniel Bryan decides to kind of put the boots up and really be done. Um, but I think deep down everyone knows when it's time for him to go, he'll go, and he'll always be treasured and loved because of just who he is. So yeah, Daniel Bryan. Next up, Kota Ibushi. Um, One of my, kind of to my own detriment, obviously, but I wasn't able to kind of get into New Japan um, until probably within the last year. I didn't really get into New Japan because it was never, obviously, it's not commercially available on like cable television or on anything like that. But once I started watching New Japan and I started rewatching old, Wrestle Kingdoms and Wrestling Dontakus and everything like that, you know, right now in New Japan, Kota Ibushi is that guy. Um, won the G1 the last 2 years. Um, his friendship, but also his rivalry with Kenny Omega in New Japan was, a great storyline and everything like that. And now, kind of him being where he's at, um, I don't think that there's kind of anything that New Japan could do to mess up Kota Ibushi at this point. Um, first memory of Kota Ibushi was in the Cruiserweight Classic, the WWE event, and his match against his the two matches of his that really stuck out to me were the one against Sean Maluda, and then obviously the one that everyone knows about, the match against Cedric in, I think, the second round of that Cruiserweight Classic. But that match is unbelievable. Um, Kota Ibushi just looked like an absolute star in that match, even in a company that he knew he wasn't going to be realistically working for the foreseeable future or anything like that. He knew that at that point he was just there to put on a show, and boy did he put on a fucking show. Sticking with New Japan, young William Ospreay. It's kind of a shame right now, obviously, him having, I believe it's a neck injury, so vacating the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. But when he was finally able to capture it, it was quite heartwarming in a sense. And I know a lot of people find Ospreay to be, the cocky gaijin in New Japan. But I don't think I'll never not like Will Ospreay. No matter where he's at, because he's still the British Heavyweight Championship British Heavyweight Champion in Rev Pro. Despite the injury, as far as I know, I think the only title he vacated was IWGP. But back to PWG, where I feel like it all all leads back to at this point, but PWG, um, watching him there, and then like with his matches, like one of the greatest matches of all time for me, obviously, and I'm kind of more biased towards a certain style of wrestling and a certain, you know, look of like a performer, but his match with Ricochet and Matt Sydal against the Bucks and Adam Cole, um, just one of the best for sure, no doubt. But then, also seeing him in WCPW, against Ricochet, and then against Kushida in the kind of Wrestling World Cup finals and stuff. His match against Ricochet, he very much sold a neck injury, whether that had been legitimate or like whether that be work or shoot neck injury. He sold it for sure. And I think that was what kind of got me into Ospreay. And then obviously following him to New Japan, having him be in a stable with one of my other current favorite wrestlers, Jeff Cobb, kind of icing on a cake for me at that point. Having those two guys together in the same faction, stable, whatever you'd like to call it, couldn't be better for me, at least. Next up, Mox. And so, when you look back at Mox when he was obviously in the Shield in WWE, and he was Dean Ambrose, I never really got into him as a character. He was good in the ring. He had a good moveset, and he was charismatic and all that in the ring, but I could never really get into him enough. But then as soon as he left WWE and went and did like the tour in New Japan, and then obviously showing up in AEW, he is who he wants to be as a performer, as a wrestler, as a person again. And I find that, obviously quite admirable. But, Mox and Eddie Kingston right now in AEW have been one of the more enjoyable parts of that to watch. But also, Mox still being the IWGP United States champion is another thing that kind of bridges the gap between AEW and AEW and New Japan, kind of bringing those two together and having Kenta show up in New Japan, having Jeff Cobb was on New Japan, was on an episode of AEW Dynamite against Mox. And now, he will probably be taking some time off in the future because obviously his wife's having a baby. And so he can't be, crawling through broken glass to, break the hold on Omega in a submission move, but anymore for right now at least. But take some time off, do his dad thing, do his paternity leave, and then as soon as he comes back, just having him be Mox again and just fucking everybody up. That's something that I just I can't wait to see, and I can't wait to kind of see the the character development in Mox. So yeah. Next up, you got the one and only Uh, Prince Ricochet, Puma Ricochet, some have called him. Um, you know, the thing about Ricochet, and it's another thing that I enjoy about excuse me, about like Will Ospreay and everything, is they're just so fun to watch. If you're not invested in any form of the storyline or anything like that, even if you never hear him on the mic, you never hear any of that, just watching what he's capable of doing um, in the ring is next level. Obviously recently he got into a little bit of hot water, a little bit of trouble for saying that he's the best high flyer in WWE right now, even better than Io Shirai, um, because he can do everything that she can do and more and do it all better. And, that kind of thing obviously landed him in a little bit of hot water, but he's right. I don't see the problem with what he said. He is, without a doubt, to me, the best high flyer in the company right now, main roster or NXT. And so, yeah, maybe it was a little bit. You could consider that to be misogynistic or, um, a little distasteful on his end. But when you know you're the best at something and people discredit you or, give other people more credit than you get, even when you deserve it tenfold, I get that could kind of, stick a bit of a thorn in your side. And so I get what he was saying, albeit, maybe don't say it on Twitter because tweets live forever, even if you delete them. It's a lesson for you, kids. But yeah, it's unfortunate right now, um, the way that he has been just, absolutely nerfed in WWE. Once he made his main roster, yeah, he had the U.S. title run and he had that feud with AJ Styles and, faced Brock at Crown Jewel, but he's the fact that he's wrestling Mustafa Ali, who is another person that is being completely misused, but he's wrestling guys like that on main event when he could easily be on any of the brands. I would love to see him go back down. And it's not even go back down, just go back over to NXT, because at this point NXT is an equal part of the main roster, or you could even say that it's taken over the main roster, being Raw and SmackDown. NXT is miles ahead of them in terms of storytelling and in-ring talent. So why not send one of your most underutilized guys who could easily be one of the top guys in any other company? Why are you wasting him? And that's one of the problems I have with WWE right now, is they have so much talent and they don't do anything with them. Raw is 3 hours long. You could easily find 15 minutes for a Ricochet match on Raw, but they kind of delegate him over to main event to wrestle against guys that he should wrestle on the main show, which is upsetting. I'd love to see him in any other company right now, but I mean, if WWE is what's best for him, I'd at least love to see him back in NXT.
so he can really show what he is and who he is as a performer. I mean, I feel like a lot of people probably saw this coming. If you didn't, did you even watch wrestling in the early 2010s and in the 2010s? CM Punk had a bad MMA career, but who cares, man? He's, you know, hot take. Hot take alert. He's the best promo ever in any wrestling to me. Um, you've got guys like Dusty Rhodes and you've got guys like Ric Flair, Randy Savage, and kind of these guys back in, the NWA territory days and the golden age and the golden era. But if you could give CM Punk a mic and just give him 10 minutes to say whatever he wants to say, and it'll be an instant classic. The pipe bomb was one of the most recognizable promos in WWE ever. I guarantee if you ask any WWE fan who was watching around that time, and even some that watch today but maybe weren't watching then or watched a long time ago but aren't watching then, you could easily say, like, hey, do you know this promo? And I guarantee a lot of them would know it, even without watching the product. They know him based off of the impact that it had on the business and on WWE as a whole. It's unlikely that we'll ever see him again in WWE, at least, which is somewhat unfortunate. But we knew that it was going to be like that. As soon as he left the company, you knew that he wasn't never coming back, which is obviously unfortunate because there's so many guys that I would love to see him against in WWE. But I'm glad we got from him what we did get. And I feel like if he ever decided to come back to wrestling as a whole, anywhere he went, he would be an instant star. But that's a shared opinion among everybody who's a wrestling fan. And another guy who is very CM Punk like, but did it 20 years earlier. Some argue that he is the best professional wrestler of all time. Maybe not necessarily from like an in-ring standpoint, but it's stone cold, man. The amount of catchphrases, and I know that sounds dumb, but hear me out here. The amount of catchphrases that this man had that are instantly recognizable classics to this day, Austin 316, open up a can of whoop ass, and just any of that kind of stuff still kind of carries as much weight now as it did back then. That's the sign of a great performer, a great wrestler, and just a great all-time talent. And so, it's no surprise to anybody that he'd be on this kind of list. But there's no way you can go without mentioning him. And next up, kind of on the same level but a little bit less, his former tag team partner from WCW. For those of you that don't know, that is Flying Brian Pillman. The loose cannon, the newfound love, and when I say newfound, I mean very newfound love that I have for Brian Pillman came off the back of the Dark Side of the Ring and obviously the Vice documentary about him, because obviously I wasn't watching WCW. I wasn't alive. I wasn't watching original ECW. I got the watered down WWE ECW that was a train wreck, and we'll never talk about it. But I didn't get to see Brian Pillman in his era, in his prime, and I will forever be upset about that, because I feel like, God, if I had been around watching Brian Pillman, and even just in ECW, that would have been a game changer for me as, a wrestling fan. And so kind of getting the after effect of it and watching, that Dark Side of the Ring and everything really gave me a new, like I said, newfound love for Brian Pillman as, a character, and then as an in-ring performer. Yeah, man, and when I say recent, I say very, I mean very, very recent. Like within the past probably 5-6 days, I've been on kind of a Brian Pillman kick, watching WCW matches and then watching the ECW matches as well. But there's something so electric, and at the same time very magnetic about him, that kind of draws you to him as a performer and as a promo and as a talent. Like he told Joey Styles, he's Brian fucking Pillman, man. Next up, world's greatest man, and I stand by this. Just the greatest man to ever bless a wrestling ring, for any company, Mick Foley. And when I say Mick Foley, I mean any variation of Mick Foley. Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Dude Love, Mankind, any of that. Just, there is something so, not heartwarming, or not, I'm kind of losing the word for it, but the kind of the draw that Mick Foley had, and was able to kind of produce, all because of, him taking just the most unnecessary bumps. Like, there will never be enough ways to thank Mick Foley for what he did for the wrestling business. But he is one of, if I had to, if there was a gun to my head, if Brian Pillman, callback, was holding a gun to my head and I had to rank, or I had to give a favorite wrestler of all time, I would probably have to say Mick Foley. I don't think in the business of wrestling, there has been kind of anyone better, in my eyes, at giving you like in-ring work, promos, backstage segments. There was something so, just like I said with Brian Pillman, just something so magnetic about Mick Foley that draws you to him. Whether that be, the Have a Nice Day, or, the mask that he wore as Mankind, or any of his personas that he put on, any of the characters that he portrayed. There's something to love in all of those, and in everything that Mick Foley has done. And like I said, there will never be enough ways that the wrestling community and the internet wrestling community and any of that, there will never be enough ways that we can thank Mick Foley for everything that he's done for the business as a whole. Um, but yeah, man, he's the best. He's my favorite for sure. Um, and moving on, it's Dwayne. He's another one that's kind of on that same level to a lot of people as Stone Cold was. And that's, if you watched wrestling in the 90s and the early 2000s, those two dudes were at the forefront of all of it, especially in WWE. But then now, both of them, especially Rock, obviously now, are kind of cultural icons in their own right, whether that be with, The Rock's movie career, Stone Cold's podcasting and his beer and everything that he does is great. But there's a reason that The Rock is the world's highest paid actor. If you ever watched any of his matches, especially against Stone Cold, the selling that he would do for the lightest of moves, the way that he carried himself on the mic, I don't think there's been anyone who could just roast a crowd into submission to the point where they still love you, even though you're just completely ragging on them. The One of the best examples of that was when Rock was in. He came back for a run with the company in the early 2000s, kind of just after his Hollywood career had taken off, where his character was just arrogant Hollywood douchebag, and he just portrayed that to the best of his abilities. No one could have done it better, but he would give the rock concerts, where he would just bag on the home crowd for 10, 15 minutes and then get a paycheck and leave. But the best one, without a doubt, was Sacramento, and just the best kind of dunking on a home crowd, no pun intended, was when he said, oh God, it was a Sacramento I can't go, Sacramento I won't stay, but I'll be back in Sacramento when the Lakers beat the Kings in May. And that stuck with everybody in that crowd the whole night. But everyone booed him because obviously he's ragging on their hometown, he's ragging on their team, but he was still just universally loved as a heel, as a face, as a tweener, as an anti-hero, whatever. Unless he was Rocky Maivia, in which case it was die Rocky die, but we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about the good stuff. But yeah, obviously his last run, or his most recent, not last because there's always a chance he comes back, but the most recent run with the company, the once in a lifetime match against John Cena that actually happened twice, but don't tell anybody, they don't need to know. Might not have been his best work overall, but I mean, when your worst work as a wrestler and as a promo, outside of obviously when he was first starting, is one of the most high profile feuds ever, I think you're doing okay. And I think that he'll be welcomed back to WWE in any capacity whenever he wants it. And I think he's probably the most, iconic um, wrestler, sports entertainer that has ever lived, aside from like maybe Hulk Hogan, but even then, I still think Rocky's got him beat. Um, and yeah, he his wrestling legacy will transcend any time period. He will always be The Rock, and he'll always be the wrestling icon that he is. Um, and up next, we got the gold medal winner, with a broken freaking neck, the bald wonder, the most egg a man has ever looked, while still being able to beat you into submission whenever he wanted. 65 Vicodins a day for the boy Perk Angle. Um, his his run with WWE was obviously great. Um, I don't think there's anything more referenced in kind of mainstream, especially in rap music. Something I noticed that gets referenced quite a bit is the Kurt Angle rookie year, kind of the successful rookie year that he had, and then just hitting the ground running and not slowing down until his recent retirement. Whether he was in WWE or whether he was in TNA Impact, Kurt Angle was always one of the most reliable guys that you could have in the ring. Like Kurt Angle is also indirectly responsible for giving the world John Cena, unfortunately. And I'd say that as a man who was an absolute John Cena mark growing up. But, if Kurt Angle is the reason we have John Cena, yikes, bad move. But, Kurt Angle was whether he was, that man got a "you suck" chant every time he made his way to the ring in WWE for like 15, 20 years, but always loved it, and it never, he was probably the best at taking, crowd heat, and just kind of embracing it into his character and who he was as a wrestler. Um, I think the ankle lock is the greatest submission finisher in wrestling ever. Um, Angle and Shamrock are the only two that have ever been good at it. Fight me, hot take, whatever. But and not only was he, obviously he was one of the greatest mat technicians in ring of all time, seeing as he was, a former amateur wrestler, an Olympic wrestler, Olympic gold medalist wrestler. But Kurt Angle was also just naturally so funny. Whether it was like anything he did with Edge and Christian, or the stupid tiny cowboy hat, or any of his kind of his interactions with Brock, when Brock was first starting out in like early 2000s, like very early 2000, 2003, and that kind of time. But Kurt Angle was, just kind of one of the guys who could be considered the total package. Um, he was funny. He was just a superior wrestler to anybody on the roster. Um, and he was just a great character as a whole, whether that be who he actually is in real life, because, you don't know whether that's who he is, but if who he portrayed on TV was who he really is, Kurt Angle is the greatest human that's ever lived. And I stand by that wholeheartedly. But yeah, Kurt Angle is the greatest. Definitely some of the best rap references, especially when he was taking 65 Vicodin in a day and everyone dubbed him Perk Angle. That's the best. And then that leads us to Michael Hickenbottom. Shawn Michaels, obviously the Heartbreak Kid. I wasn't really into the Rockers. And I also can't really say that, like early 90s, mid 90s, Shawn Michaels is my favorite either, because, when I was growing up, it was the kind of the second forming of, when it was DX, but it was just him and Triple H, and they were dads at that point. They were in their 40s, but they were still, drawing cocks on Vince McMahon and dumping poop on the Spirit Squad and, doing dumb shit like that. But I think the three of the best WrestleMania matches of all time, to me, all involve Shawn Michaels. And all three of them were in consecutive years. 24, the retirement match against Flair. 25 against Taker, which some argue is the greatest pure wrestling match ever. And then Michaels Taker 2 for Michaels' career, or the streak, obviously. Mania 26. He doesn't get called Mr. WrestleMania for nothing. And, obviously there were prior WrestleMania performances and maybe better WrestleMania performances. I don't know. But, what I do know was growing up, Shawn was kind of he was like my idol growing up, as a young wrestling fan. And it's like, I wanted to be just like him and just like Triple H. I wanted to be like DX. I was, giving the crotch chops at school and telling everybody to suck it, and, like fake super kicking my friends, like hitting my friends with the Sweet Chin Music at recess in elementary school. Because I wanted to be like Shawn Michaels. And that was obviously before I knew about the early 90s Shawn Michaels with, the substance abuse problems and the alcoholism and the, kind of giving his life to God. And I wasn't kind of privy to his character like 2006, because when I first started watching wrestling, Michaels was the guy. Michaels was the go-to guy for me. But then now, as an adult and having learned more about the history, obviously, and everything about the brand, but watching that now, kind of gives me, more enjoyment watching his earlier stuff. But nothing will ever beat the trio of consecutive Mania matches as one of the best stretches of big pay-per-view matches for a performer, for somebody like him. Nothing will top that, to me at least. Even in the future, I don't think anything will ever be that, like, as impressive as that was. And I know I jumped the gun a little bit, but last but more than certainly not least, is Mr. Brody Lee. Rewatching his kind of AEW debut the other night is what kind of gave me the inspiration to make this list and to talk about this with you guys and everything. Watching that, and then watching the Brody tribute show, and listening to the New Days podcast about their work with Brody, especially Biggie and his work with Brody in FCW. It kind of just makes you want to slow down and just really take a look at how precious life is. How quickly anything could change at the drop of a dime. Bryce Remsburg, one of the referees in AEW, and Daniel Bryan also shared the same sentiment of, if there's a Mount Rushmore of wrestling dads, Brody is number one up there. And his work with most recently, obviously, the Dark Order, and his work in AEW were amazing. Brody being the Exalted One, and showing up in AEW to a lot of people's excitement was definitely a very welcomed surprise. But then, obviously, going back to his time in WWE prior to that, when he was with, the Wyatt family and the Bludgeon Brothers with him and Eric Rowan. And even all the way before that, I think I watched a match recently of Brody's, but I want to say it was in Chikara, where he was just, still as great as ever. His in-ring ability, any of the things that he did could easily take a backseat to the person that he was. At the end of the day, the championships and the gold and the memories and the matches that you have with him, or that he has, excuse me, will, never be forgotten. At any point, there will always be, at the very minimum, one person that strives to be like he was, um, as a person, as a wrestler, as a dad. But, there there can never be enough said about Brody as, just the man that he was. There can never be enough positive things said about him. Um, and it is a shame that we lost him as young as he was. He's 41 years old, 42 years old. That's People don't understand how young that really is, because we look at guys like Ric Flair, who are still up and kicking in their 70s, and Vince in his 70s. But then you also look at guys who had to prematurely retire, like Steve Austin did, because of all of his prior injuries and stuff. I think he was only in his early 40s when he retired as well. But losing Brody, as very early as we did was just very world shattering. And I know this list and this talk that we've been having started off with just talking about guys doing double moonsaults like Ricochet did in War Games, or Pete Dunne breaking somebody's fingers, or The Rock selling for Stone Cold Steve Austin. But at the end of the day, they're wrestlers, they're performers, but they're also people. Then you can judge your favorite wrestler off of any promo they've ever cut, or any match they've ever had. But nothing will ever beat the person that they are. And Brody Lee was the embodiment of just being the best human. And so, yeah, unfortunately, we're kind of leaving it on a sad note, but also it's a happy time. His son, his 8-year-old son, for those that don't know, has already signed a contract with AEW. So it's not like he's ever gonna be gone. The red variation of the TNT Championship that he's got there, retired. No one will ever hold that again, because he was the last person to hold it, and he was the best person to hold it. So, as sad as it is that he's no longer with us, his memory will always live on. And I think that's what's the most important thing about him. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up. I know it went a little bit longer than I was planning on talking, but kind of once you get down that rabbit hole of things you love and things you're passionate about and things that will always have a very special place in your heart, you could ramble on forever. And it may not make sense to anybody, but there could always be one person out there that shares the same viewpoint, or even the opposite viewpoint, but you're still connected mutually with that shared love for something. And so just wanted to get on here and talk to anybody about something that I'm passionate about. And so I thank you for listening. I thank you for taking some time out of your day, out of your busy schedule to listen to me ramble, listen to me talk, listen to me say a bunch of dumb shit. But thank you.